Okay, so in this video, I'm going to talk about NMA, Neuroplastic Mental Acceleration. It's the ability of the brain to change its structure and increase its capacity based on function, intention, and environment. Once upon a time, neuroscience used to say the brain was like a rock, really. And once you got your brain, that was it. And I certainly believed that for the first 50 years of my life. But once I started to understand that you could change the structure of your brain, give it greater bandwidth and frequency, I started to realize that you could get much more capacity for greater levels of super creativity and super fluidity in your head. It's a very interesting shift that you can experience, and that's what the university does. It gives you training programs that are both sort of orientated to give you the capacity to navigate the future, as well as training programs that can give you a job that can replace the one that you're in at the moment. So we are, unlike any other educational organisation that is based around getting a certificate, then getting a job, this is based around increasing your capacity to be able to train other people in the process of developing brains, because that is the real industry of the future for human beings. So to give you an understanding of that, you've got to start to wind back a few years, and I'm talking about 200 years, to a guy called Vincenzo Mallicani, who was an autonomist, an Italian autonomist, and he sort of paired animals and then trained one, not the other, and then killed them and dissected them, unfortunately. And what he saw was that there was a difference in brain structure. It was the first evidence that brains were changing based on function, intention, and environment most importantly. So as the years went by, not a lot was done like that. And the neuroscience world has really not looked at it a huge amount. But there was, in the 1960s, a woman called Marianne Diamond, who was a doctor, and she looked at the way that the brain structure was changing in terms of behaviour for young adults based on the environment they were put in. And that research over those years was implemented into stroke victims, and we start seeing that the brain can, given certain impetus, certain structural pressures, actually grow new synapses and neurons. Now, your brain has around about 100 billion neurons in it, and each neuron has about 7,000 synapses. And in that structure, you have what's called an unconscious, a mind map, which is based in your unconscious, which projects into who you think you are and what you think you believe. That's an amalgamation over many years of layers upon layers of what you could call learning, but it's the adoption of principles from whether your parents or your relatives or people that you admired. They didn't necessarily write, but you incorporated them into what's called a layer cake of the mind, which is your unconscious, and that unconscious feeds up who you think you are, which is what's called an egocentric identity, a shell identity that isn't a conscious identity. It's just one that you think is conscious, but it doesn't have the attributes of what greater levels of consciousness has. And now consciousness as a word is a greater level of awareness, and at a lower level of awareness, it's a bit like being drunk. You don't know you're drunk. It's your brain, you're in it, you can't do anything about it, and you just think it's normal. And if other people replicate that and are very similar to you, then you think that's the standard. But unfortunately, everybody went through a rote learning system, which is the school system, which suppressed the thinking. 15 years of suppression of the mind, because remember, I said to you, function, intention, and environment changes brain structure. And your brain survives the environment that it's been put into by changing its structure and optimizing for that. So once you start to realize, well, what happened to my brain, and ask those questions. Where was my brain for 15 years at school? What was it doing? Memorization and repetition? Was it doing creativity, creative thought, critical thinking? No. So it's optimized for those processes, but your ego will help you self-identify beyond who you currently are. And that is the problem. So when you're starting to look at something like NMA as a subject, which is Neuroplastic Mental Acceleration, or for therapy, consciousness change therapy, you're looking at something that doesn't go through the principles of let's talk to a person and work with the established identity and the current brain structure. What we do is we address the current brain structure by overwhelming it and increasing the bandwidth and frequency, so problems that were here no longer are problems. You're starting to think much bigger, much more expansively. You've got creative problem solving, super fluidity, super creativity, gamma and theta, hemispheric synchronization. You've got all of these things coming forward to your brain so you can start to explore the future in a much more powerful way. That's what the university teaches you. And I'm going to kind of break that down in certain subjects. And I'm going to keep these videos a little bit short, maybe about 5 minutes, and you can get into them and start to sort of reflect upon them.